Listen, I have a lot of respect for these creators and what they produce. These aren't fighting words, this is edutainment. With that said, who doesn't like a good showdown? This is a Home Assistant blueprint for Wasp in the Box automation, and I'm going to create my own Home Assistant version using Node-RED and compare it to this blueprint to see which is better. But the catch is, I'm not going to look at their implementation. The only thing I'm going to know about this blueprint is what's written here on this page.
Tech Enthusiast Automation Battle.
Now, I previously created two versions of this automation. The first one worked pretty good. This was done in the Akara app. This has been running for about 3 weeks now, and I've had no issues outside of the normal Wasp in a Box edge case flows, which I'll talk about that later. The downside to this version, though, is that it only works when I'm using all Akara products. Akara light switch, Akara door and window sensor, Akara motion and light sensor. I need all of it in order to work. The second version of this automation was in my previous video where I used Akara's new Matter-enabled P2 motion and light sensor. To overcome the downside of the first version, I tried using Apple HomeKit's automation, but even though I called it a success, I would give it a solid C-. And a lot of you commented about how to make it work better, with one of the comments being,
use Home Assistant.
Say less, my guy, say less. For those of you who don't know what Wasp in a Box is, it's an automation approach that lets you use motion sensors and door and window sensors to determine the presence in an enclosed space. Imagine if you had a box and you can't see in it, but you can tell when motion is detected within. If a wasp flies in and out of the box will detect that motion, but when the alert stops, you don't know if something is still in the box. It could be empty, or it could be standing still, you don't know. However, if you close the box, we can now make assumptions. We can assume with pretty good certainty that something is in the box if there's motion detected at least once while the box is closed. Even if it stops moving, we know that it's there as long as the door remains closed. Now I'm going to apply this logic to my automation to create my own Node-RED version of Wasp in a Box, and hopefully it will have more advantages than this blueprint from AlexanderBabel. You know, I kind of like that name.
What's your name, man? Alexander.
Babel. Here's what I'm looking for. One, it's going to need to be pretty simple, right? If the automation requires additional helpers or entities, then I expect the automation to create them for me, and I shouldn't have to do it myself. Additionally, right, if I wanted to add this automation to different rooms, can I do that quickly? Number two, how flexible is this automation? Something I learned while doing Wasp in a Box is that your motion sensors can adjust their timeouts. So does this automation require your timeouts to be a certain length, or does it provide you options or the flexibility to change different parameters to make it suit your system? 3, how reliable is it? Am I left in the dark when I'm not supposed to be? 4, and this is the bonus one, how well does it handle edge cases? Now, remember earlier when I said that, there's an edge case that is typical with Wasp in a Box automations? This was done in the Akara app. This has been running for about 3 weeks now, and I've had no issues outside of the normal Wasp in a Box edge case flows. Well, if a person enters and exits a space really quickly and closes the door, this can often trick the sensors into thinking that someone is still in the room while the door is closed. So if the automation can turn the lights off in that particular scenario, then it will be awarded bonus points. So subscribe and let's start testing. Come with me as we test this Wasp in a Box technique using Home Assistant. Currently the lights are off, the door is slightly ajar. When we open it up, nothing should happen until I walk inside. Now, there is the motion sensor, so, it'll catch the door moving and whatnot. Now that it's up and working, it's supposed to stay active as long as I'm in here and moving about. I've iterated through this particular automation several times. A lot of times it kind of half worked, but realistically, I got a lot of inconsistency with the lights. It would just flicker on and off, or it just wouldn't really operate the way that we expect. I have 3 different automations or flows that controls this whole experience. Right now, it's been about 5 minutes. The light has not moved or turned off once. So I think this is working well so far. So first, to check whether or not the lights should turn on, it's basically just looking at the motion sensor. I've set it so that way it will search every 3 seconds and kind of determine to see if someone is here or not. And then based off of that, within a 30-second interval, it will let the alert through and try to turn the lights. So even if this sees me, let's say 30 times in that time span, the lights will only try to trigger once within those 30 seconds. To determine whether or not the light should turn off, the lights are being pulled, I think, every 2 minutes, or it's kind of variable. You can change how long it's pulled for. But because it needs to turn off the light, it's basically checking first to see if the state or the occupancy is like in a weird state that it's unsure of. So it knows when it's like occupied because of the Wasp technique, but there's a state where it's unsure. It's in that period where it will try to turn it off. And of course, it's going to look at our schedule to see if it's time to run that automation, because we don't want this automation to happen, let's say, late at night or while people are sleeping or in certain periods. So there's also looking at that. And it also is checking to see the last time someone has been caught by the motion sensor or when it got tripped. If it happens within this period of time of the polling, then it will not turn it off. There's the other idea of setting the occupancy. So that's the whole idea of me closing this now. So it's closed. Because of the motions, or because of the what do you call this, door window sensors, and the fact that the motion sensor is catching me, it would have set the state of, let's say, this bathroom as occupied. I'm actually able to capture this within the global settings, or with global variables within Node-RED, which I think is fantastic, because now to use this is way less complicated. I don't need anything extra. I can just use the states of the light, the motion sensor, and the door window sensor, and it should just work. All right, it's been several minutes and it hasn't turned off. Like I kind of stayed in the corner so it couldn't see me. I kind of stayed underneath it. It worked out, man. It worked out. It's still on. If I hid in the tub, it would probably still work out. I am going to open this door, and when I do, it should put itself in a state where it's like, okay, maybe there's someone here, maybe there's no one. When I leave, after 2 minutes, it should turn off. That light right here will stay on. That's separate from the light that's on the wall. But we expect that one on the wall to turn off. The light should be turning off soon. I have no idea when, though. I haven't been keeping track. Oh, there it goes. Ah. I am pleased. I finally got Wasp in a box working using Home Assistant. And it's not like it was super hard per se. Like, yeah, it took me several weeks to get it right. But, like in the end, like the actual automation itself was like solid. It's just that I was just being silly, man. Like I just had my logic all weird and wrong. I thought this did fantastic. But I could be biased. Where I thought this lacked the most is when it comes to like setting it up. So the simplicity aspect, sure, it is one node, but when you set up those nodes, you have to add in the entity IDs manually, as opposed to like the autocomplete that you get from using the native nodes within the system. If I can figure out how to do that, that'd be great. But right now I don't know how to do that. Reliability, robustness, all of that is there. Flexibility, it's also there. You just get one node and it just works for everything. So pretty good. Now let's download AlexanderBabel's. All right, so I downloaded the blueprint into Home Assistant and started filling it out. It was actually pretty straightforward. For the first line, it's the door sensor. So just find the entity for your door that you want. Same thing for the motion sensor, just find the entity. And then the motion sensor delays, one is for delaying how long it should take to turn off, and the other one is just how long your motion sensor will reset for. When I got to the occupancy and last motion helper, I realized I made a mistake and I needed to actually create helpers for those. So I went and did just that. It's looking for a date time sensor, as well as I think an input Boolean helper. So once filling both of those out, I came back here and filled it out as I expected. Yep, let's test this out. Okay, nothing happened. Let's try again. So it occurred to me that I don't have any light sensors in here, which means that I'm probably supposed to be looking at that input Boolean to know whether or not I should turn on or off a light. So I'm going to actually have to create an automation that looks at that in order to, I guess, do that type of automation. Hopefully that made sense. I quickly spun together this automation when the bathroom input is toggled. Then basically it's going to look at the two conditions. If it's occupied, it'll then turn on the bathroom light. If it's not occupied, it will turn it off. I think that's all I need. I'm gonna assume that's all I need. It's unclear, so we're gonna go with it. So after making these changes, the automation worked as expected. I walked into the bathroom, the lights came on, motion sensor saw me, and even after closing the door, like, I can see that the occupancy changes according to like the state of the bathroom. So when it came to reliability and robustness, this did pretty well. Flexibility, not as high as I would like. It's still pretty good. You can still reuse it, but there seems to be a lot of rework that you would have to do. Granted, I guess you could just duplicate, but it felt a little cumbersome. Where I felt it lacked the most is just in its simplicity of like setup. You have to create helpers for each of the zones or areas that you want to use this particular automation for, which I feel could have been done a little bit better. To add an element of surprise, a longtime viewer named Ben Jones reached out after seeing my previous video about the P2 and shared his Node-RED Wasp in a Box version. I only read the JSON in this email and I haven't tried it yet, so we're all going to experience this together. We're going to see who takes the crown. This is AlexanderBabel's subflow. With it, we're able to determine whether or not lights should turn on or off based off of given inputs that we pass it. Where my subflow will turn on and off the lights for you and keep track of everything, this one simply takes in the inputs and outputs whether or not we should have an on event or an off event. This subflow was designed to work with the Open Extensible Rack System, or OXRS. What's interesting about this system is that it standardized all of the chatter and communication between the smart home devices into standard MQTT payloads, which is really easy to take advantage of within Node-RED. You can check the link in the description to learn more about this project if you're interested. So to get this Wasp flow working, I have to pass it that standardized payload, which you can see here within this function node. It requires a type, requires the sensor, and it requires the event. One other thing that this needs is the topic of box for any of the entities that are contact sensors. So think of doors or windows. Whenever it sends a message, it needs to also set the topic of box. So for every event that it receives, this Wasp node will keep track of its state. It'll know whether or not the box is open, closed, whether or not the timer should start, and if the Wasp is trapped in the box, it'll stop the timer. And you can see all of these state changes here on the outside of the node, which is pretty cool. And like I mentioned earlier, this will not change the lights for you. You're going to have to do that yourself by reading the on or off event that comes from this node. So here I have a call service node where I dynamically take that on and off event and I trigger the appropriate service call. And just like the previous automations, this one did extremely well. It was able to identify when I was trapped in a bathroom. It knew when the door was open versus closed and when it should turn the lights off. Overall, this was a fantastic automation. I was able to do exactly the same thing as I was able to do with all of the previous automations. I like that it can indicate on the node itself the state that it's in. That's super convenient. The only thing that I would find as a downside to this is just it's hit on simplicity. This is based off of the Open Extensible Rack system, which gives a very particular payload, which means that this that you're using has to follow that particular pattern. So if you don't have that system, this won't work immediately for you. You're going to have to just readjust your nodes so that way it will spit out that particular payload or interface. Check the link in the description to find all the links to the automations that you saw today, and you can try them for yourself. Also, consider becoming a channel member. Listen, wait, hold on. Not only do you get early access to most of these automations that you see and hear of, but you also get to be part of the behind the scenes conversations. And I know it doesn't sound like much, but I only found out about Wasp in a Box because of one of my channel members. As a matter of fact, it was the same channel member who helped me create the automation blueprint for this video over here. Just think about it, no pressure.